Shweta Chawla is here with us to speak on the topic investigating in the remote access world. She is an independent digital forensic investigator with nearly 15 years of experience in digital forensic and cyber investigations. She heads her own forensic investigation firm, SC Cyber Solutions in Pune, and has been consultant to various police departments for investigations into cyber crimes, apart from handling private cases for individuals and corporates. So the stage is all yours, Shweta Chawla, and we are happy to have you once again.
Thank you. Let
Thank
me
you.
just share my screen.
Sure.
And okay, is that visible?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it's come up. Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me back again. And I guess the comparison to Poirot is both very kind and a little scary, because investigators like Poirot, Miss Marple, and their kind of investigators are absolutely intuition and observation based. What we do is slightly different. We are also intuition and observation based, but we are also heavily dependent on technology. And heavily dependent on technology, we realized quite how much when the pandemic hit. Nothing worked. We were all stuck at home. Investigations, crimes, everything moved home. And we've had criminals who have wreaked havoc across the world with their activities. We have had multiple cases that are happening because finally, when nobody was prepared for the pandemic, nobody anticipated work from home kicking in. And work from home kicked in overnight practically for all of us, and things got complicated, to put it politely. So anyway, what do? We do investigations, all kinds of investigations. As long as there is some kind of a computer element to the case, we will investigate it. So everything from banking attacks, intellectual property theft, corporate espionage, murders, we've worked on every kind of case, and we continue to do so. So I guess in some ways we are very lucky. Investigators have, I guess, a very challenging life, so it's good fun for us. So I'm going to talk to you about one of the challenges that we faced, and I'm going to do it through the perspective of a case study. This is an investigation that came up a little while ago, came up around the middle of 2021. And the first that anyone had got to know about this was when things got very complicated for the company called Lamplighter. So I'm going to be using certain terms here, and I'm going to explain those terms before we go off into our investigation. So the first is what is called remote forensics. Remote forensics is also very often called online forensics or network forensics, primarily because when we say we are investigating a system and we are investigating it remotely, we need some way of connecting to it. Remote investigations, though, can be very challenging and in some cases can be very problematic. What do I mean by both? So investigations are by default something that is required by the law, and our entire assumption of an investigation is that the case is eventually going to go to a court and needs to be proved there. It doesn't matter whether you're on the side of the prosecution or the defense. The case needs to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. Here comes the problem. To prove it beyond reasonable doubt, you need to be able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that there was no irregularity in your investigation procedure. That's your first. For which we have something called a chain of custody, which means that every time an item is collected, every time an item is handed over to somebody else, every time an item is interacted with, a record of that activity is maintained. The second is If we are looking at cases that are remote, we need some way of triggering off the activities on the machine that we need them to. So typically when we are looking at remote forensics, and the primary way of working forensics is we take an image, a clone. How do you take a clone of a live machine? Typically, to take a clone, we get there, we unplug the machine, we take the storage device out, and the storage device is cloned. That's not something we can do remotely, which means that we are going to be taking a clone of a machine that is working, and the clone is being created on the same machine that the data is being taken from. So there is definitely going to be some amount of cannibalization, some amount of pollutants added to the clone that we are creating, which is not a good idea at all. Also, if we have to clone, we have to install some sort of a software onto the machine that is being cloned. So some way of imaging, some toolkit needs to be transmitted to the site of cloning. There, some users will need to interact with that machine, install this servlet or software, give us access, and then we can work with it. So as you can see, there are many complications that can happen with this. Courts, of course, are not very happy with this activity that we might be doing. And so remote forensics becomes that much more challenging. To that, let's add another parameter. We have remote access forensics. And remote access forensics is something that we are all living with today. How do we preserve, extract, and examine computer systems which are remotely connected and the applications that exist on them? It means we have to, in some way or the other, take remote access to those machines, which means we'll use something like TeamViewer, AnyDesk, those kinds of applications. Now, in this particular situation, we've got a company called Lamplighter. And Lamplighter is a manufacturing firm which makes a whole bunch of specialized tools and applications. And at one point of time, somewhere in May 2020, Lamplighter is informed that one of their clients has been getting the same material from a rival company at a cheaper cost. Now, obviously, Lamplighter is not happy. Lamplighter also is not particularly concerned about this particular product because it is not a product that they are very happy with. They've been reworking it considerably. But they're definitely afraid that if one kind of machine design has been taken out, it is possible that they will lose other content of this kind. Now, please remember that this entire case is being discussed at a time when everybody is in work from home mode, everyone is locked in, travel is practically impossible. You've got offices of Lamplighter which are on the absolutely other side of us. So we are on the West Coast and Lamplighter is on the East Coast. Company employees are scattered all over. So they are everywhere. They've gone back home because, as many of us have realized, rents in cities when you can afford to work from home is much better. So a lot of people have actually gone back home. And why not? So machines have gone with them. Now, Lamplighter was very sensible. When the first lockdown hit in 2020, all employees were given the machines that they typically work with, and they were told, you take these home. In the cases of some employees, these were desktops. In the cases of most employees, they were laptops, all running the Windows operating system, and all which had come pre-configured with the TeamViewer remote access software. Now, how does one go about an investigation of this kind? The first question that we tried to answer was, where all did this critical intellectual property reside? Second is, who had access to this critical property? Now, obviously, not all the employees of a company will get access to these kinds of things. Also, these kinds of machine drawings are not stored everywhere. They will be stored on specific locations with a whole lot of permissions enabled. At least you always hope that a whole lot of permissions are enabled. Now, we figured out that the only location where these files could be found was one folder within the server of Lamplighter. Within one of the servers of Lamplighter, let me be much more specific. And this one server had limited access and only critical data resided on it. So, of course, our first assumption was server has been compromised. Let's analyze it. So we did. We tried identifying what data existed in the server, if there was a compromise, what was the firewall traffic like, were there any alerts by the IDS, the IPS, the SIEM, all the security that existed at Lamplighter. They had everything, by the way. And everything configured well. So no malicious activity seemed to have occurred on the server, except for one little thing that was visible. The server maintained detailed logs, and these detailed logs showed us some quirky entries at the date and time that we actually had no idea when the attack could have occurred. So while investigating the entire log, and here's the interesting part, Lamplighter also has this tendency of storing their records for 18 months, logs for 18 months. And we have come across many cases where companies store their logs for the month. And to come across a company that does just the opposite and stores them for 18 months was very, very nice for us. So we looked at the logs. Of course, looking at 18 months worth of logs for some suspicious activity is not the easiest of tasks, because you have to look at each line of entry and see if there is something that is out of the ordinary. So not fun, and it's a manual kind of interaction that you do with the log file. So we went through the log file, and on the 5th of May, we came across certain entries. This would have been 5th of May 2020. So Lamplighter came to know of the case somewhere in March 2021, and that would have been 10 months after the actual, if this entry is accurate, then after the actual breach. The interesting thing that was found on this system, on this log, was that one machine called the admin PC by user Lalit had connected to the Lamplighter server on the 5th of May at 6 in the morning, approximately, between 6 and 7 in the morning, and had issued commands for multiple files, and the command was a print to PDF command. So the PDFs existed, and the entire, all the machine drawings were turned into PDFs, and the logs showed us for many, many drawings that the print to PDF command existed. And this went through in detail. Now, once we looked at this, we didn't find any other suspicious entries. So this seemed the most important as far as we could find. We also found that at this time, or soon after this time, the server had been issued a command to open the mega cloud storage drive. And this was done through the system's browser, the server's browser. And at least this is the suspicion that we had, that the PDFs were uploaded onto this mega drive. Now what do we do? So we decided, let's investigate this admin PC. So the admin PC was found. It belonged to this employee, or rather it was used by this employee Lalit. And Lalit was fortunately in the same city as Lamplighter is located. The IP address that was there showed Lalit's home IP. So the system was confiscated and Lalit was questioned. And Lalit, of course, denied everything. He had not been involved. He had not used the PC, of course, and that is a normal line of questioning. The interesting things came up when we started investigating the admin PC. The admin PC had no malware. Neither did the server, by the way. So that was ruled out. The admin PC also gave us no indications of actually connecting to the server at the time of question. So 5th May, 6 a.m., the admin PC had apparently not even been turned on. So let me rephrase that. The admin PC and Lalit had this lovely bad habit of not turning off the system. He would leave it, let it idle, and eventually the machine would go into the sleep state. Once in a rare while, possibly when new updates came, is when the machine would be shut down. But at all other times, the machine was not shut down. So it would sleep, he would log in again, enter his password, and continue activity. For 6 a.m. on the 5th of May, there was absolutely no activity of this kind. There was no login that had happened. Lalit, in fact, had logged in somewhere close to 10 o'clock in the morning, and that entry was there. So logs are telling us that we can't find malware in the system. Lalit is insistent that he is not in any way responsible, involved, and has no idea what we are talking about. He claims never even to have seen the machine drawings, which, given his job, he did not need to have seen anyway. No activity on the machine that we could find between 6 and 7 in the morning. No communication from the machine to anything else at 6 or 7 in the morning. Browser history searches, including deleted elements of the browser history. No mega cloud storage. Of course, he could have been smart and deleted an entry, but there were no gaps in activity. In fact, Lalit's system was very typical in that there was office browsing, there was shopping browsing, and there was online streaming like Netflix, Amazon Prime, those kinds of things. So, in itself, a very, very typical system. But our IP says he has connected. The server has given access to the machine because the server gives access only to credible machines, only to authorized machines. So the access has come. How did all of this work out? How did the attack happen? So we looked at every possible thing. We looked at registry. We in fact went to the extent of looking at the MFT and the journaling files to identify if at any point of time, any file with the name similar to any of the intellectual property files existed on the system, even if it had been opened on that system. Nothing at all. So what happened? So we finally, by the way, since we were connecting to this system remotely, because how else we can't fly to the East Coast, we can't drive to the East Coast, we can't take a train to the East Coast. We are absolutely in the middle of lockdown. So also, like I told you right in the beginning, all their systems had TeamViewer installed by default. Now, investigators are suspicious people, always. Any investigator is going to tell you that we are suspicious, cynical creatures. So we were reluctant to use TeamViewer, so we had asked the company Lamplighter to install AnyDesk on the server and on the admin PC. The admin PC, by the way, was now in the custody of the CEO of the company. So he is doing all of this, actually sitting and watching us play around with AnyDesk on his system. And so he finally got bored because this activity took us about, I think it eventually took us 12, 13 hours of examination. And CEO finally said, I'm tired of this TV show, I'm going away. And that's where investigation actually takes its biggest departure from anything that you read or see. Investigations are very, very time consuming. So anyone who tells you how investigation is done in half an hour, 40 minutes, 2 hours, doesn't happen. Typical investigations will go into days. So this one did the same thing. Now, nothing that we can find tells us anything. So we said, okay, let's look at, we were going through every possible access and attack vector. Remember, no malware, no activity on the system itself, which means no physical interaction with the machine, no files that we are looking for, no other remote access activity that the registry will show us. So finally, we looked at TeamViewer itself. And here's where we found interesting stuff. We found logs on TeamViewer that showed us activity from a certain machine, a system name, which was on that particular day and that particular time. Now, the TeamViewer activity had started off just before 6 a.m. and had concluded just after 7 a.m. So for a little over 1 hour, one machine was connected to the admin PC. What this machine did, what instructions were given to the TeamViewer machine, we don't know. But it seems most likely that by connecting to TeamViewer, the admin PC was instructed to communicate with the server in obviously an authorized manner, because it was authorized. So what are we looking for? Let me show you the bunch of questions we asked it. And why did you not flip? There we go. Come back. Thank you. Okay. So these are the questions that we were typically asking, that any attempts on the admin PC to connect to the cloud, any other user, was Lalit involved, was somebody in Lalit's family involved, everything was examined. Eventually we decide, okay, nothing else is working, TeamViewer seems the culprit, and the logs did prove that to us. Now came the much more interesting part of the story. We've got the proof. We know that there is a machine that is connected to TeamViewer. We know that there is an IP that will be registered with TeamViewer. We examined the possibility of involving law enforcement agencies, but Lamplighter was not keen on it. Two reasons. One, that they were not keen on being drawn into a long legal battle. Two, I think, and this is much more important from their perspective, they were quite happy with this one particular drawing being leaked and made public, because they had in any case changed it around so much in the last few months that their product was now much, much, much better than the existing product. So they were quite happy. Second, also came the problem of who was the competitor. So when questions were asked, when the market was surveyed, it was found that the competitor was a former employee of Lamplighter. This former employee was working in the IT department. And working in the IT department is where things became much more interesting. This particular person was a man called Sam, and Sam was the person who was responsible for giving Lalit the system. So he had given him a clean system with all the software that the company required installed on it. 3 or 4 other machines that we investigated of Lamplighter showed that they had accessed TeamViewer at days and times when the users were not using them. Of course, those systems did not have the credentials to log into the server, so nothing much happened there. But eventually we were able to conclude that Sam had been responsible, because TeamViewer has this very interesting little option that it gives you, which is access without interaction of the machine. So you don't need to give access. Somebody who has normally been connecting to your machine can connect even without your permission. And no entry in the logs showed us or disproved this. So that's something that we still need to figure out. But in this case, it seems, with all likelihood, that Sam had managed to connect to Lalit's system, to the admin PC. Credentials, unfortunately, none of the credentials had ever been changed by Lamplighter. Every password that we asked them had been in existence for the minimum of 3 years. And the only saving grace was they, of course, did not use passwords like admin123, but which also we have seen in cases. But they did use fairly known passwords amongst their employees, at least. And eventually, though, yes, we did know that it was Sam who had done it, Lamplighter chose not to go and file a police case. Had we needed to go and file a police case, things would have been much, much more complicated, simply because none of the methods that we used and none of the methods that we chose to use were absolutely and completely acceptable by the courts of law. There were interactions with AnyDesk being installed, there were other software that we needed to install, and remote investigations become that much more challenging. Because given the state that remote investigations are in right now, and given the legalities of it, we need to be able to prove that no irregular activity happened to those machines at any point of time. So our way of establishing that was that every second of interaction with the machines, with both the admin PC and the server, were recorded in entirety by our systems. And those videos were handed over to the client at the time of closing the investigation. Should the case have gone to court, these videos would possibly have held up in court. But Lamplighter was not keen on going ahead with a legal investigation, which was something they had established on day one of the investigation, which is why we chose to experiment with some of the techniques that could exist. And that is the state in which remote investigations and remote access investigations are in today. Experiments are being carried out by investigators all the time. We are constantly working at evolving new techniques, using new tools to find evidence and to collect and preserve that evidence. New methods are created all the time. The challenge is getting the new methods to be accepted by the courts of law, because as everyone knows, law does not move as quickly as technology does. So this was a fun, challenging investigation, probably because we were walking a very fine tightrope. We kept trying to make sure that we didn't do anything that was legally incorrect, that was legally unacceptable. At the same time, we needed to get as much evidence as we possibly could get from the systems. So this was a fun tightrope, but it was also a very interesting tightrope. So these are some of the software that we used. AnyDesk to remotely connect, FTK Imager Lite to hash the logs that we collected, as well as extract the MFT and journaling files from the admin PC. Triforce ANJP for examining the MFT and journaling files, and the Foxton browser history capturer, and viewer to look at the browser records on both the systems. Not the only tools we used. These are just some of the most used tools in the investigation. And these are all good tools to work with. So here's a listing of our findings, just in case something that I missed explaining something to you. And like I said, no malware anywhere, which was both heartening and challenging, because in most cases it's just you end up finding that, okay, there was some kind of a malware, some kind of a rat that was installed in this machine that opened it up. In this case, the rat was an absolutely legitimate software installed in an absolutely legitimate manner at a time and by a person who were legitimately authorized to do so. What changed was the person, Sam, taking advantage of the authorization that was given to him much after the authorization should ideally have been revoked. So cases can be challenging, cases can be interesting, cases are always critical. So it doesn't matter whether it's a simple case or a complex case, it's always a critical one. And yeah, that's it for me. So any questions? If at any point of time you feel you want to get in touch, ideal ways to do so. And I'm done. So are there any questions for me?
Thank you, Shweta, for your deep insights.
My pleasure.
Yes, yes, for your deep insights and for this very technical session. And I'm sure the participants have benefited from your session. We do have a few questions from our participants.
Lovely.
Yeah, for you. And so we'll get right into the questions.
Yeah.
So the first question is, what are the security standards we need to implement while building a three-tier architecture on cloud?
Okay, not exactly an investigation question.
All right, all right.
Yeah, but I think the earlier Mr. Sunil would have been the more correct speaker to answer this question.
All right.
But I think all your standards do talk about cloud architecture, but I think most likely look at the NIST guidelines that exist on cloud security.
All right, all right, all right.
That should help.
All right. So we'll quickly go on to the next question. So our participant has said that great to learn the detailed explanation on remote forensics and remote access forensics. And sometimes they can both be confusing at times. So are the cybersecurity experts trained on these aspects?
Cybersecurity experts, no. Cyber forensic experts, yes. There is a fine line between cybersecurity experts who look at proactive security. Cyber investigators look at reactive work effectively. We are looking at finding evidence, we are looking at finding traces after an event or an incident has occurred.
Right.
And
right.
So I didn't give you all the details of the investigation. More,
right.
of course, can be found in a forthcoming article.
Right. And this is another question from the chat. I think this is regarding the Pegasus spyware. How can we defend such attacks?
So the Pegasus spyware belongs to a family of infections, I would more correctly call it, that are called zero-click attacks. Right. Which means that there is absolutely no interaction on the user end for any kind of a zero-click attack. What we typically have a whole lot of security for are one-click attacks. So we tell you don't click on an email, don't download something. Those are all one-click attacks. For zero-click attacks, there is zero user interaction, hence the name. And with software like this, there is no security that the individual can put in that will help them out.
Right.
The security has to be at the end of the applications where they work at hardening their own systems, right. As well as security at the operating system level, where again they look at hardening and bug bounty and those kinds of things.
Right. So I think this will be our last question. The question is, with people working across time zones simultaneously, will it not be difficult for forensic investigators to identify and analyze the detailed logs on servers?
Oh, excellent question.
Right.
All right. Yes, it is correct to assume that it would be difficult, but in actuality, it isn't. So every application that exists stores the time in a specific time zone. Right. So take TeamViewer, for example, the logs of which we analyzed. Every log on TeamViewer is stored in the UTC time zone and is not stored in local time at all. So even the logs that we received, we needed to convert them from UTC into IST before we realized that the machine was logged into at close to 6 in the morning.
Right.
So something that we do by default in any kind of investigations and timestamp analysis is verify the time zone and then convert it into the time zone that we feel is comfortable. Typically, we work with converting all time zones into UTC or GMT.
Right. Yes. So I think that was our last question, Shweta. We like to once again thank you for being with us. It's always been a great pleasure to have you on the Reinvent conferences, and we hope to have you in the future conferences as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. All right.
My pleasure, and I enjoy being on the Reinvent conferences. They're always fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shweta. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.